Hello, are you an adult wanting to learn how to play the piano, but you're uncertain which book to first use? If so, I've designed this video to help you. I will be giving detailed reviews of the top 4 best-selling books on Amazon to help you make an informed decision. If you're new to the piano, I understand your struggle of trying to find which book to use. There are so many options out there, so you might be uncertain, what do I even look for in my beginning piano method? Here's where my training and expertise is designed to help you. I have a Ph.D. in piano pedagogy and over 20 years of experience teaching students how to play the piano, especially adult students. So I know what to look for in books to help my students be their most successful. Like with many purchasing decisions myself, maybe like you, we go to Amazon, we do a search, and we look for the one with the top reviews and maybe the least expensive. But if you do a search like that under piano and keyboard books, you'll see these top 4 books. And they all have very high reviews at 4.5 or above, with thousands of people commenting upon them. But will our piano learning really benefit and thrive from getting the least expensive and most highly reviewed book on Amazon? Let me help you make that informed decision. I've created a robust rubric to help you evaluate these 4 books. It has 5 categories. They're organization and clarity, meaning are the pages uncluttered? Is the information presented in a clear manner with plenty of detail to understand it? Do the pieces include practice suggestions? What do I do with the music that they provide me? We'll also have a separate chart for the comprehensiveness. Does it include the most important piano learning concepts such as music theory, technique? Does it teach you how to play in positions beyond C major? Does it develop independent note reading, how to understand music so you can learn music that you'd like to learn as well? Does it teach the pianist how to play with dynamics and articulation, and even how to use the damper pedal? Another category is the repertoire. Does it include high quality repertoire that you enjoy playing? The pacing. Does it allow a complete beginner to start there and evenly progress understanding concepts all the way through? And then the expansion. This means how long could you expect to use this book? Are there any kind of gaps that would force you to have to buy another book before you're done with this book? Are there any kind of book 2 or 3 to follow up, or any supplement books to progress your learning? Each rubric category will be given a score, percentage out of 1, like a 0.1, a 0.4, a 0.9. And then all of those 5 categories will add up to a total score I'll save to the very end. And there'll be a comparison chart so you can make a decision for yourself. I want this out of a method, this book provides it. So stay tuned to the end where I'll give my top recommendations of books for you to learn piano. Before we jump in with the reviews, pianists, I just want to make it clear that the best decision when starting the piano is to find a local piano teacher. If you can't, I provided these lesson tutorials to help guide your progress at the piano as well. All right, pianists, let's use that rubric to evaluate our first book. It is the top-selling piano method book on Amazon. It's called How to Play a Keyboard, a complete guide for absolute beginners, level 1 by Ben Parker, copyright 2013. So we're going to start with the organization and clarity. And I'll give you my score first, and then I'll explain why I've given it that score. I gave it a 0.4 out of 1. For the most part, it has clean, uncluttered pages. However, the pictures, like those showing the posture and the hand position, are not detailed enough, as you'll see in some of the other books, to really know, how do I hold my hand? How should I place my fingers on the keys? So it's lacking some clarity. It does helpfully include some boxes to highlight key ideas, such as new note names. This is where C is at. This is where D is at. It does have some lack of clarity on the pieces in regards to which finger number do I actually use to play these notes. I think the font of pieces is sometimes too small compared to the actual words that explains it. There are no practice suggestions throughout, meaning, do I count? Do I tap with this piece? Do I sing the finger numbers? Do I sing the note names out loud? And how do we even count it? Some of the rhythms are provided, but we don't know how to actually understand that rhythm. Next, let's look at the comprehensiveness of this book. We'll refer to a separate chart where we look at where it provides notes and rhythms all the way through damper pedal. And you can see that this book really checks off only notes and rhythms. The only notes that you'll learn are within bass C and middle C position, and then a next note A. So just 11 notes in total, gives you some basic rhythms, but it doesn't go into all those other categories that I think a pianist needs to learn when they're first starting. This is a book that's written for keyboard players, but keyboard players still need to have proper technique, know how to count your rhythms, and especially have some understanding of chords, which some other books help provide those concepts. Let's move on to the repertoire category for this book. I gave it a 0.2 out of 1. It does have a mixture of simple author-composed pieces, some nursery rhymes like Mary Had a Little Lamb, a few popular pieces like Jingle Bells. So within the repertoire, there are 10 pages of using the auto accompaniment. Remember, this is a keyboard book. So looking at like page 23, Treetop Blues, we just have the right hand kind of a lead sheet format. The left hand is just given a G. It doesn't really even show which octave I should play on the G. I don't see the clef I should play it in. So the author says you should select the auto accompaniment track and you would play a G, and it would fill in, as he says, the bossa nova accompaniment track. But if you're playing this on an acoustic piano, that doesn't really work for you, or your keyboard doesn't have that function. It does include just a very few pages of some chords. I'm going to play for you off of page 41, the 12-bar blues. The right hand's the only chords, the left hand just fills in the simple 1, 4, and 5. It doesn't give you that theory, but it does give you all those letter names and fingerings within the note head. So here's a little portion of it. For the pacing category in our rubric for our first book, I gave it a 0.3 out of 1, as it does stay at a primarily simple but even level. It doesn't introduce many concepts. There are some gaps in the learning, however. If we look at the Jingle Bells piece, it has that dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm, but with no introduction of how to actually count and understand that rhythm, so you could use that rhythm in other pieces. Under expansion, I gave it a 0.1 out of 1. At $11.95, the beginning adult pianist would most likely work through this book maybe in a month or two, depending on how often you practice. It does have the least amount of pages, only 47, compared to some of my top ones at 150 to even 180 pages of quality learning material. The lack of comprehensiveness would lead the pianist to have to buy other books very soon to supplement their learning. I don't think it helps you really transfer and understand skills to other pieces as well. Notebook 2 has a supplementary easy keyboard tunes book. So my overall score for this first book is 1.1 out of 5. Now let's use our rubric to review book number 2. The second book that we'll review today is the piano book for adult beginners, and it says Teach Yourself How to Play Famous Piano Songs, Read Music, Theory, and Technique by Damon Ferrante. This was copyrighted back in 2017. We'll start with the organization category. I gave this a 0.3 out of 1. It does helpfully show new concepts in boxes on the page, but if you look at the majority of the pages, they're quite busy with lots of information and boxes and pictures, so it's kind of hard to catch what am I supposed to understand from this page. The pictures can be a little dark at times to really see the detail of how should I really be holding my fingers on these keys. It does have some helpful explanations within the repertoire pieces, but again, it can kind of distract from the actual note reading of the pieces. At times, the font size is inconsistent, where the explanations are much larger than actually getting to see the notes as well. Under comprehensiveness, I've given it a 0.4 out of 1. Again, let's look at our chart to review more details of this one. It does introduce notes and rhythms in many different keys. Does not do much at all with technique. Does have some helpful theory. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Does go beyond our positions just in C position, gets into some G and some F. Does not really help the pianist develop independent note reading. I'll explain on that more with the latter two books today. Does talk about some dynamics and articulation, and no damper pedals introduced, even though it uses Für Elise, which is beautiful with pedals. So if you're going to have a piece, I think it'd be great to add the damper pedal, which is performance practice to play that piece. Under the repertoire, I've given it a 0.6 out of 1. The author has done a pretty good job of including a large range of pieces and many different pieces. It ranges from nursery rhymes, folk tunes, author composed, and popular and classical arrangements, so it's a large range. It does have 22 pages of pre-staff reading where you're just seeing the letter names and the finger numbers to play. I think that's a bit too much for this book, especially because it paces pretty quickly after that. If we look at the middle of the book, a piece that you might be playing would be Jingle Bells on page 52. Here's a little excerpt of the Jingle Bells out of this book. You get the idea. In the chorus, it only includes the right hand. So there's a lot of just right hand before that left hand becomes more developed. So that's the middle of the book. And let me show you how difficult it gets at the very end on like page 105 with the entertainer. It moves from a pre-reading complete beginner to an intermediate level, which takes a couple years of piano study. So here's a little bit of the entertainer. The repertoire leads us into the pacing of this book. I gave this a 0.1 out of 1. It's actually the lowest rating for this book, as I think it's very unevenly paced. It had those 22 pages of pre-staff reading and then very quickly progresses to that level of difficulty. So there would be gaps in the student's learning. Another gap of learning is some of the theory explanations. It introduces the whole and half steps for major scales, which is really helpful. But the very next page, it does not give the exercise to play the major scales with those types of fingerings. Actually, the next page is pentascales, 5-finger scales, which is actually an easier scale than major scales. Next up is the expansion category. I gave this a 0.5 out of 1. At $24.94, this is the most expensive of the adult methods we'll look at today. But whereas in the previous book you would only have it for maybe a month or two, this book actually has too much repertoire and span of skills covered. It would leave you as the pianist having to supplement pretty quickly to get some of those other skills that this one does not cover, because you wouldn't be ready to play the entertainer by the end of this book. Does not have book 2. It does have 2 supplementary books, piano scales, chords, and arpeggios, and beginner classical piano music. My final score is 1.9 out of 5. Next, pianists, let's review Alfred's Adult All-in-One Piano Course, Lesson, Theory, and Technique, copyrighted back in 1996. For the organization and clarity, I gave it a 1 out of 1. It does have very clean, uncluttered, attractive, well-organized pages. I think a bonus on this book is that it uses red to highlight the key information. Some new concepts are always shown in red. It does include practice warm-ups. If it introduces chords, does something with it before you play it within the piece. It gives really helpful practice suggestions. It's not just straight repertoire, but what do I do with these pieces, such as you should first tap and count it, and it gives you counts in the warm-ups to understand what to do. So you should play and sing the finger numbers, you should play and count, you should play and sing the note names. So you're going through different ways to develop your independent note reading skills. Under comprehensiveness, I gave this a 0.95 out of 1. Let's look at our chart and I'll explain more. It does have some very helpful technique incorporations. I think the best of all of the books that we'll look at today. Has some preliminary technique exercises just to prepare the hands to play. Really helpful pictures of the fingers on the keys. Where should I actually place the fingers on the keys? What should I look for? Which is great for a self-taught learner. Has really helpful pictures of the hand anatomy. As you go to learn the octave scales with the thumb cross under, shows you what that hand looks like and why that works so well. It does have really helpful hand and exercises, which you know I love for technique incorporation. Number 1, hand in number 6. So it already includes those within the book, so you wouldn't have to go buy that to start. I think you would still need some technique supplement from your teacher, or even using my video tutorials to know what that really looks like and sounds like with those techniques. Books can only deliver so much on technique. Along with comprehensiveness, I want to expand upon the independent note reading comment that I have on that rubric. This book actually gives learners strategies to develop independent note reading. It gives you a few notes within the note heads, but not every one of them like the previous books gave us, meaning that you're going to have to use some landmark notes, landmark G, middle C, and develop some note recognition and become automatic at that reading. If you always see it written, you're not going to develop that automaticity. Also, very helpfully explains the concepts of intervals. What do seconds look like? What do fourths look like? That interval reading actually happens faster than automatic note reading. Fourths can happen anywhere on the staff and they'll look the same. Also uses popular tunes like Silent Night on page 80 to explain how to count that dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm that we saw previously in that book on Jingle Bells. But it uses that, it shows you exactly how to count it, then you can count it and play the piece. Has some really great theory incorporation, has built-in workbook pages where it asks you questions and you fill in the answers on what are the names of the notes, the intervals, the chords. Goes through scales, key signatures, primary chords, in the keys of C, A minor, F, D minor, and G. Talks through and shows you some charts on natural and harmonic minor scales. Teaches Roman numerals and lead sheets. So many skills. Does not go over inversions, so you'd have to have a teacher help you on that. Introduces and practices using the damper pedal. I'll show you a piece with that in just a moment. Next, let's move to the repertoire. I gave this a 0.95 out of 1. This does begin immediately on the staff reading. If you like pre-staff, the next book might be great for you. Does start with C position, the right hand only, and then incorporates the left hand. The styles, there's a mixture of composer-created folk tunes, not many classical pieces, but it really has a high emphasis on popular repertoire. Blues, rock, jazz, movie tunes, musical tunes. So middle of the book, I'll play you page 107 so you can hear a little bit of this blues. So here's a piece called Got Those Blues that the composers created, and it does have long, short eighth notes, and it gives you in the red to know how to understand these blues so you can improvise on it your own. Here it is. helped me play that musical was there's lots of dynamics written in. That previous blues exercise had no dynamics, has some chord symbols so it directs my eyes to look ahead to know what these chords are, and then you could transpose a piece like this to your favorite piece. So that blues was about in the middle of the book. I just want you to see how far you would progress in level 1 by Alfred. This is on page 144, Over the Rainbow. Uses the pedal, first and second ending, stays pretty primarily within the C position. Lots of great chords and patterns, so enjoy. Alfred helpfully includes just the right amount of fingering just when it changes, not every one of them. Includes that damper pedal, does a little bit of hand over hand type of arpeggio technique within this piece. So beautiful pieces overall in the Alfred's book. For the pacing, I gave it a 1 out of 1 as it gradually progresses through introducing skills in a systematic manner, goes through the intervallic reading, thinking in different keys. It gives proper reinforcement before going on to the next piece, so there's not gaps in the student's learning. Lastly, the expansiveness, I gave it a 1 out of 1. At $10.26, this is the least expensive of all of the methods that I reviewed today, and it has 159 pages of really quality learning material. Progresses from a beginner through early intermediate level with that Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And it does have about 3 books of this all-in-one approach so you could keep your learning going. Has Christmas books for levels 1 and 2 to supplement. So a student might have this for about 6 months to 1 year of piano study, depending on how much you practice. Lastly, my final score is 4.9 out of 5 for the Alfred's book. Lastly, let's use our rubric to review the Adult Piano Adventures All-in-One Piano Course Lessons, Technique, Theory by Nancy and Randall Faber. This is book 1 I'll look at today. So under organization and clarity, I gave it a 1 out of 1. Similar to the Alfred, it's attractive pictures, explains the different parts of the piano, and it has new concepts in yellow, similar to that red concept as Alfred. If we look at page 9, this is really helpful, clean pictures for each finger number on the keys, what it should look like, numbers of fingers, how you should play the thumb. So it's helpful to get the piano started with putting their hands on the keys. Under comprehensiveness, I gave it a 0.95 out of 1, which is the same score as the Alfred. If we look at our chart, it really ticks all of the boxes that we want out of a beginning piano method. It includes theories. There's drills to name the notes and the intervals. Has chords, lead sheets, Roman numerals. It shows inversions like F over C, but it actually does not include that theory, just like the Alfred. So you would have to learn that from my lesson tutorials or another teacher. Students are asked to fill in the chord symbols as part of their theory workbooks. It has really helpful lead sheets on page 168 where you have the melody and the student has to fill in the chords. Hand over hand arpeggios, goes through pentascales and full octave scales. Unique to the Faber, it does have some ear training and improvisation. Goes through your key signatures, primary chords in C, F, and G as well. Like the Alfred book, this helps students develop independent note reading skills where you're not reliant on seeing every single note name and fingering written in on the book, which is actually distracting to pianists. Students are asked to name like the one starting note, shows one starting finger, and then you read by intervals from there. Has rhythm drills where students have to learn how to tap and count music so they can do that in other pieces. Students are asked to write in the chord symbols, as I mentioned. There's 3-minute technique drills, and the ending appendices are especially helpful on this. Let me look at this with you. Even though it does not go through all of these within the core of the book, it explains the whole and half steps so that way you could learn your 12 5-finger scales, hand-over-hand arpeggios, and this is the only book that has a full music dictionary of what they teach within the book. So if you forgot it in a later book, it will go through it in the dictionary and even shows you the different page references so you can see it used in repertoire. It also asks students to transpose and to do sight reading, so I think it's quite comprehensive. Didn't give it a full score like the Alfred because it's lacking in some of the technique development that we would need to actually play with the expression. There's where you need a teacher. You can check out some lesson tutorials I provided you to know how to use your technique. Moving on to the repertoire, I gave this a 0.95 out of 1. This is the only book that has built-in teacher duets. These wouldn't have to be for a teacher. Maybe you have a friend who's more advanced at piano. They could play it along with you. These are great for motivating you at a beginning level because it just makes the pieces sound more full and beautiful. It does include the musical form and practice suggestions. What do I do with these pieces? It goes through some steps. Let me play you a middle piece, which is on page 66, and you'll see part of the focus of this book is classical music. This is Shepherd's Songs from Beethoven's The Sixth Symphony. So the most challenging piece is back on page 174. It's the last piece of this level 1. Gives a helpful historical background on it in the key of G major. The student has to fill in what key, some little bit of pedal, and the left hand is a waltz. They have dynamics to indicate which hand should be voiced louder as well. So overall for the repertoire, there's a mixture of folk tunes, but primarily classical pieces that are arrangements of symphonies and operas and famous tunes. It does have a bit thinner texture than the Alfred, doesn't have as many chords, it introduces chords later, but it is a classical approach. Under the pacing, I gave it a 1 out of 1. It does start with pre-reading, off the staff expression pieces with the black keys and the damper pedal. Talks about a little bit of arm weight and dynamics. Staff reading doesn't start until page 30. So if you'd like a little slower pace and be able to explore off reading the staff, Faber's a great choice for you. Progresses evenly but slower than the Alfred. Under the expansiveness, I gave it a 1 out of 1. At $17.99, this would be for a complete beginner through about an elementary level. Doesn't progress as far as the Alfred and does not progress as quickly as I'd mentioned. You might have this for maybe 3 to 6 months of study for book 1, but does have a book 2 and supplementary books levels 1 and 2 for classics, popular, and Christmas. So if you wanted more pop pieces, you could get their other book. Overall, I gave Faber a 4.9 out of 5. All right, pianists, we have made it through all 4 reviews of those top-selling books on Amazon right now. Hopefully you've learned some new information to help you make an informed decision. Just some concluding thoughts. I'm going to just go back through the comprehensiveness of that independent note reading so you know kind of what to look for in a piano book. Yes, it's helpful for beginners to see some of the note names and some of the fingering to begin, but if you have it on every note, it can really become a crutch. It's not asking you to develop note automaticity. When I see a C, I remember it's a C. If the note name's there, you're not going to have to remember that. And fingerings is only really specific to different 5-finger scales and octave positions. You have to learn to make some of those fingering decisions yourself. Faber is great, and Alfred, they show you just a few precise fingerings when I change hand positions rather than thinking every finger number. So if you always have those note names and fingerings there, you really can't transfer those concepts to other pieces. So I think piano methods should help the pianist develop strategies to read other music. So we are left with the tie. If you look at our scores, a 4.9 out of 5 for both the Alfreds and the Faber books. Let me just give you some kind of key points so you can make your own decision based on your learning goals, maybe how quickly you like to move, what type of repertoire you like to play. What I like about the Alfred, I appreciate their technique exercises, their explanations, the way the fingers should look on the keys, the hand anatomy pictures, and the hand placement. Again, you would have to have some supplement with the teacher to give more choreography to your playing for more expression. I like some of the repertoire, especially their focus on popular tunes, movie tunes, musical tunes, jazz, and blues. Some really great jazz standards to check out in that book. Familiar tunes that a lot of listeners and your audience will enjoy hearing you play. It does have a faster pacing than Faber. It jumps right into the staff, but it progresses evenly all the way through to the end. The Faber has overall more of a classical approach, great arrangements of some famous classical pieces, less pop and blues, but you can check out their supplement book if you'd like more of that and you like the Faber approach. Slower pacing, so you can take your time going through, more pre-staff reading. We get into chords later, so the pieces have a little thinner texture than those pop pieces you'll hear in the Alfred. They're the only book that has those teacher duets if that's important to you, teacher-friend duets to play along with you to make them kind of sound fuller. Really, I don't think you could go wrong with either book, the Faber or the Alfred. They're a tie. You can make that final decision. A last friendly reminder, remember a book cannot deliver everything that you need in your piano instruction. This is where you should find a good teacher. If you can't do so, you can use my lesson tutorials to even supplement that learning with the teacher or to learn along with me. You can subscribe so you can see those weekly videos that I release to guide your learning. You can comment if there's other things that you have questions about or you'd like me to shoot a video on for you. So hopefully you can make an informed decision after today's review of which book that you would like to use to start your piano learning journey. Happy practicing.